Admit it, there's something really satisfying when an underdog prevails, right? It just is more satisfying as a fan, or if you're watching a movie. It makes you happy. It makes you feel that maybe there's justice in the world. That the player who came in, not just in sports, but in any kind of drama, who came in with fewer resources, fewer advantages, a smaller reputation, gets the upper hand somehow and prevails over the favorite. We're going to talk about that. Why is that kind of embedded in some of our psyches? Where does it come from? Actually, psyche might be an important term today. We will talk about mythology, sports, and everything else.
Picture yourself in a living room, your pipe and slippers set out for you. I know you think that it ain't too far, but I hear a call of a lifetime ring. Felt the need to get up for it. Oh, you cut out the middleman, you're free from the middleman. You got no time for the messenger, got no regard for the thing that you don't understand. You got no fear of the underdog, that's why you will not survive.
There's no way I can do a show about underdogs and not open with Spoon. I mean, there's a lot of underdog songs, actually, but for me, there's only one. We are talking about underdogs today. We're going to do that with two terrific guests here in the A segment. Terrific guests all the way through, actually. Many of them people that we already know. But before I introduce the guests, I'm going to do a point of privilege, a rare point of privilege, and just tell a quick story from my youth. In 1967, I was 12 years old, and the Boston Red Sox had been terrible. They had had a losing record for 8 consecutive seasons, consistently finishing near the bottom of the standings. They came into that season with no great expectations whatsoever. Carl Yastrzemski was the only player on the roster that people outside Boston would have ever heard of. An absolutely unimpressive team. Attendance was way down. And somehow they won the pennant that year. I, at the age of 12, was sitting in Fenway Park, thanks to a friend who had an extra ticket, on the final game of the season when they clinched the pennant. Actually, they clinched a tie for the pennant and then had to wait for another game. And it became called the Impossible Dream Year. And in some fairly smarmy ways that involve smarmy use of that particular song. But still, and I just imprinted on it. You know, it was just in the wet cement of my 12-year-old brain, this idea was shaped and it took hold that you root for underdogs. And is there something so enormously satisfying, gratifying in a way that supremacy never could be, to watch an underdog team do well? And I think that's true for a lot of people. It's not true for all people. I think Yankee fans in general would probably just prefer to be supreme at all moments. And for me, it actually made it difficult to root for the Oriema era UConn women's basketball team because they would have these multi-season winning streaks. They had one where they won 111 consecutive games, another one where they won 90 games. This is like over the space of multiple years. And so it's not that exciting to me to see that team win. It's exciting for me to see somebody beat a team like that. And that is the underdog mentality. Joining us now to say more, A.J. Jacobs, author of The Year of Living Constitutionally, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Constitution's Original Meaning. His previous books include Drop Dead Healthy and The Year of Living Biblically. We have had him on the show for a lot of those books, and it's always fun. He's also a host of the podcast Hello Puzzlers, and his Substack is Experimental Living. Also with us, Louisa Thomas, staff writer for The New Yorker, the author of Louisa, The Extraordinary Life of Mrs. Adams, among other books. So let's get going with this. And so, Louisa Thomas, let's begin with just the very idea of an underdog. In a way, some of the stuff that you've been covering lately gets into that. The U.S. men's national soccer team, at least for a while, appeared to be an underdog. And certainly the New York Knicks kind of came in to view as underdogs at least who hadn't won for a while. But say a little bit about how you see that. Like what earns you the right to think of yourself as an underdog?
Well, I think you actually brought up two really interesting exceptions that prove the rule, because ordinarily we would not say that the United States national team of anything is an underdog. And ordinarily, I think most New Yorkers don't think of New York City, and in particular, New York's dominant team as much of an underdog. But you are correct. The Knicks had a long title drought, half a century. And the U.S. soccer team has not had a title drought. I mean, because that would imply that there was something to dry up. And the soccer team was the rare case in which fans were sort of justified in saying nobody believes in us, because nobody truly believed in them until this year. In which case they wrote a sort of like had a brief stretch of magically being everybody's favorite darling until it became a sort of polarizing entity once Donald Trump stepped in and called FIFA in an attempt to sort of maybe influence the outcome of a certain decision. But and once again, we were reminded that the United States is perhaps not quite the underdog that we might always like to believe in. But certainly sports has a wonderful tradition, I think, of pitting dominant teams against underdogs and then rooting for the little guy.
Yeah, and I think also the underdog doesn't always have to win for it to be wonderful and exciting. I can't pinpoint the year, but there was a year in college basketball where Bob Lanier was the star center for St. Bonaventure. He got knocked out. They didn't have much of a team, but he had a knee injury. He was out of the tournament, and they had all small guys, and they went up against Jacksonville, which had Artis Gilmore at 7'2" and Pembroke Burrows at 7 feet, Tom McIntyre at 6'10". That was their front line. So St. Bonaventure lost, but they gave it a good fight. They kept it pretty close until maybe the fourth quarter. Yeah, go ahead.
You don't have to go back that far. Cabo Verde played Argentina not long ago at the World Cup, and for a brilliant, thrilling 100 minutes or so, it seemed like Cabo Verde was really holding its own and threatening the number one team in the world. And it was this improbable, wonderful story. And Cabo Verde lost. But it was one of those stories in which at the end, everyone sort of said, well, they were not the losers in anyone's eyes, including, we hope, their own. And yet my husband, who is an Argentina fan, reminded me that there was actually something kind of nice about that outcome, because it meant that Argentina was free to continue playing and we were not going to be deprived of, the wonderful matchups that Argentina would give us in the future, which is in fact the case. Where it's going to be a game. We're recording this at, midday on Wednesday, July 15th, and Argentina is about to take on England. And, it stands to reason that Cabo Verde would not be fighting for a place in the final. So in some ways, that is the best possible outcome for an underdog. Yeah,
I think when you're a Cinderella team, and it's certainly true of the NCAA basketball tournament too, you win 2 or 3 games, you probably are going to hit your ceiling at some point. And that probably would have happened to Cabo Verde. But I think there's a whole bunch of my friends were text threading during that game. And when I think he was a back, came up and just nailed that right-footed shot across the goal, it seemed more beautiful, I think. They were all sort of saying, that's the most beautiful goal I've ever seen. I don't know if it was or not, but in that context, its value appreciated because of that.
Absolutely. I mean, we really do weight context differently for different teams. A World Series win meant something for the New York Knicks that a World Series win for the Oklahoma City Thunder would not have meant. World Series, NBA Finals. A World Series win would have meant something
that would have been impressive.
Radically different. That would have been impressive.
Yeah, get out there and play baseball and see how you do.
Yeah, exactly.
So AJ, I don't know. I feel kind of like an underdog a lot of the time. Do you feel like an underdog?
I do. And also I think public radio, it's an underdog in the media landscape. So go public radio. Yeah, I feel in my books, I try to portray myself as an underdog, which I am sometimes. And yeah, I think we are just programmed. We are wired to root for the underdog. Probably there's some innate evolutionary reason. But yeah, I'm a big fan of underdogs. It's why I always root for the Washington Generals against the Harlem Globetrotters. They're the ultimate.
That is taking it a little too far, maybe.
Yes, no, I don't. But
and-
actually, that does bring up a point, which is the underdog fallacy, which is a real thing. You can find it on the always reliable internet. It's the false belief that just because a person or team is at a disadvantage, they're somehow better morally, like they deserve to win. And the ultimate expression of this, I believe, was my mother, when I was a kid, was reading a biography of Adolf Hitler. And the biography started with him getting rejected from art school, and she found herself saying, "Oh, I hope that this guy overcomes these obstacles and makes good." And she said, "I had to stop reading because I was rooting for the underdog, Adolf Hitler." And that to me is just indicative. It's not just because you're an underdog doesn't make you good.
That's a pretty extreme form of proof, but yeah.
It went right to Hitler. Yeah, the Godwin.
So it was just like my country. I am young, scrappy, and hungry. And very quickly, since I just did that annoying thing, to the point of your book, I mean, arguably, the story we tell about America is an underdog story. The story that we were telling about 250 years ago these days is, I think you would agree, an underdog story.
Well, you can certainly position it as an underdog story. It's all about the narrative. But yeah, the idea that this ragtag group of Americans could go up against the biggest military power in the world is just extraordinary. Like if Kalshi were around then, and you had General Washington's troops against the British Empire, like it would be 3% chance.
Yeah. Actually, apparently a young man named Ebenezer Trump did bet on the Colonials at that time and did very well. So, Louisa, the one thing that I kind of left out, even of my little Red Sox parable, is that after 2004, the Red Sox started winning a bunch of games, and then this kind of Red Sox Nation exceptionalism narrative started, and pretty soon everybody in America hated the Red Sox. And that's the thing about being an underdog. Bobby Fischer was an underdog. You just wrote about chess, and that's why I'm bringing this up. But Bobby Fischer was an underdog the first time he played Spassky. But you can't stay there. I don't know what the statute of limitations is about that, Louisa, but it seems like you can't stay an underdog forever.
Well, Majay brought up a good point about underdogs, actually, that there is a kind of dark side, which is that we like to tear down our winners. Mm-hmm. And our underdogs like to sometimes, there's an edge to the desire to kind of dismantle but I do think that, and what I mean by that is like some of that hatred in the heart sometimes is born from a sense of inferiority that some underdogs have. But I do think that, I was actually joking about the Red Sox earlier today, that the decline and fall of the Red Sox actually began as soon as they won the World Series. And there is something to this idea that we cohere around a certain kind of story that we can tell about ourselves. And when that's threatened, it sort of all goes to hell. And you can't stay an underdog forever. Even the lowly New York Mets never managed to shed their underdog status. And yet, even now, as they are losing and losing and losing, they're somehow mixed up in this kind of whole idea of being, wealthy beyond measure, while not getting to be lovable anymore. Because it is very, very hard to remain lovable forever.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case, and I think also you're right about supremacy and how it breeds. I mean, Gollum probably felt like an underdog. He definitely felt like an underdog.
Well, Colin, I think that is such an important point, is that everyone sees themselves as an underdog, which is why it's so alluring to root for the underdog. I mean, you would be hard-pressed to find a group that does not see itself as sort of this persecuted minority, and that includes billionaires. I remember a couple of years ago when billionaires were complaining, everyone's targeting us just because we have $1 billion. We're just trying to make the world better. And so, yeah, we all kind of associate ourselves with the odds are stacked against us, no
AJ,
matter what the reality is.
Yeah, go ahead, Louisa. Yeah.
The Tom Brady New England Patriots thing, nobody believes in us, you know.
And AJ, I think, is it fair to say that in your writing, you kind of position yourself that way? I think when people meet you, they think, oh, he's this kind of, perfectly nice looking, well-adjusted person. He's sort of, he's not the kind some people, but I think as a way of engaging your reader, you sort of say, oh, I've got the same set of problems that you have, but maybe worse and worse problems and funnier problems.
Well, I purposely give myself problems by putting myself in these situations, because I know that's what makes a good story. If you have no problems, there's no story. And you want something surprising to happen, to overcome. If Goliath kicked David's butt, that's not a great story. That no one's going to read that. So you need a story where you overcome the odds.
Right. Big guy beats up little guy. Yeah, I'd like to know more about that. That sounds really interesting. So Louisa, I know that there was a study done about the difference between hating a team versus hating a person. We could go back to Argentina on this one. There's a lot of Argentina, apologies to your husband, but there's a lot of Argentina paranoia right now in the World Cup audience, and this feeling that maybe the refs are favoring them and, keeping them in the tournament longer and all this stuff. But I think you can hate or fear Argentina and preserve your love of Messi. But maybe you could say a little bit more about that, Louisa.
Sure. Well, Messi in his own way was an underdog, right? Yeah. He's tiny. And there is something about, actually, when you see him, he still looks like an underdog, even though he's the greatest player in the history of soccer, because he's just standing there and he's so small, and suddenly he does something incredible. And partly, I think, actually, there were two social psychologists, Jesse Walker and Thomas Gilovich, who were interested in this question about whether or not people have a preference for individual underdogs or dominance or team dominance, whether or not there's any kind of distinction. And what they found was that people are much more comfortable with the idea of individual dominance than they are with team dominance. That actually people respond better to Roger Federer maybe than they would to the New England Patriots. And they were kind of interested in why, and they explored some different ideas. And one idea that they came up with that I think is really compelling is this, this instinct that we have toward awe. Basically, when we see Roger Federer or Messi or whatever, we're sort of reminded of overcoming the limits of human limits. We can watch Roger Federer and appreciate that actually we have an expanded sense of what we can do. Whereas if we look at the New England Patriots, we just see this organization that's crushing everybody else. And that there's something really kind of beautiful about the awe. So in a way, I think actually you've used a really kind of nice example, because you can watch Argentina and you can appreciate how this little guy, in this case, literally little guy, has expanded our sense of what humans can do, while also kind of being like, not Argentina again. Like, how about little Cabo Verde?
Well, I think also, Louisa, there's that, Seinfeld's famous, well, really, you're rooting for laundry, because, in fact, players cycle in and out of teams so quickly that, if you want to hate the Yankees, you're going to have to, learn new names every year. But I think another part of this, for me, I grew up in a Red Sox household where my grandmother quite seriously believed that the Red Sox rigged baseball every single season. But, when you look at a Jeter or an Aaron Judge, those guys are really kind of hard to hate. And Mookie Betts and Ohtani, they're not particularly, you could hate the dominance of the franchises. But then you look at the individual people and I don't know, don't those guys seem kind of nice?
I won't trust anyone who hates Mookie Betts. I'm sorry. He's like one of the most likable human beings on the planet.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that generalizes, you can be politically a Democrat and you hate Republicans, but then you meet a Republican who's helps, wash your car, and you're like, oh, he seems like a lovely person. But you hate the idea of Republicans. So it's easier to hate an institution than it is a person.
So AJ, we do have to talk about animals. This is something that you wrote about for National Geographic. This is this is the AJ Jacobs perfect article for National Geographic because there's this thing called charismatic megafauna. This kind of idea that people just love pandas, right? They're just like
Right.
They want good things to happen for pandas, and they actually those things get also called flagship species. That the pandas become a symbol for a whole habitat. But there's sort of the opposite, and that's what you looked into. They're not dogs, but they're underdogs. So talk about some animal underdogs.
Yes, well, I believe that there's a lot of lookism in human society, but also in the way we treat animals. Ugly animals, we just brush them aside because they are hard to look at. But animals like the naked mole rat or the vulture especially is reviled. Even the word vulture is kind of has a negative connotation. But without vultures, we would be in a lot of trouble. They are nature's garbage collectors, and there have been studies that they keep diseases down. So I think uglyism and lookism is a real problem because ugly animals get much fewer conservation dollars than your pandas and tigers and other beautiful creatures. So yeah, underdogs are not just people. Animals can be underdogs too.
I just want to say a word on behalf of the naked mole rat, too. And the reason I know about this, I have this friend. He and I were reporters together at a newspaper, feature writers at a newspaper. He was the A.J. Jacobs of the Hartford Courant. You guys are almost like separated at birth. And when he was working on a feature story, he would turn into whatever the feature story was over the course of a couple of weeks. And when he was writing about naked mole rats, it became very unpleasant. I mean, he didn't eat his own poop. He didn't eat his own poop, but he came very close. And naked mole rats they do everything that they could possibly do to disgust you and not make you like them. But on the other hand, they live for 37 years, which is like the oldest kind of rodent. They don't get cancer. I mean, AJ, we should be really interested in naked mole rats.
They are remarkable. That's right. Exactly. I'm all for ugly animals' rights. Is a cause close to my heart.
There's a great nonprofit to start right away. I'm sure you'll be able to raise a lot of money. So Louisa, I have this theory that we celebrate a thing even more when it's a vanishing frontier, and I wonder a little bit about that with underdogs. I mean, certainly we've seen it in professional sports for a long time, where successful teams tend to get more successful because they have more money to spend getting successful. And now that college sports has sort of followed suit to a certain degree, and programs and their fans have more money to attract players with, you just sort of wonder: are we still going to have those Cinderella teams in March Madness? How do you see that? Do you see the underdog as maybe a slightly endangered species, to carry on with AJ's metaphor?
Actually, the opposite. Okay. I see the underdog as a burgeoning class of competition. And partly it's because there is a little bit more parity that's been injected into sport because of, let's say in college sports, because of the transfer portal, because of NIL, because some of these smaller schools actually have a chance of getting someone of moderate talent who might have gone to one of the bigger schools and sat on the bench are now thinking, oh, well, maybe I'm going to go to a smaller conference school and have the chance to make some money and light up March. And I do think that we saw this in the World Cup, where there is a sort of and for some related reasons, not the same reasons. Obviously, there is no transfer portal in international soccer, but there is a lot of the diaspora is very big, and so you actually have some sort of choice among in the case of many players about where to play, and that has actually had a somewhat I don't want to say it's a leveling effect because we are not talking about even playing fields, but a team like Cabo Verde has a chance to play on the same stage and threaten a team like Argentina or Senegal and France or whatever. Two teams that might have historically, in the deep past not been in the same arena are now able to face each other, and there are more chances for underdogs to plausibly beat David. I think that's only a good thing.
On that hopeful note, we're going to end this segment. Thanks to A.J. Jacobs, author of The Year of Living Constitutionally, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Constitution's Original Meaning, host of the podcast Hello Puzzlers, the Substack Experimental Living. Louisa Thomas, read her terrific sports writing in The New Yorker, and the author of Louisa, The Extraordinary Life of Mrs. Adams, among other books. We'll take a break. We'll come back. We're going to talk about underdogs in mythology.
If it wasn't for bad luck, you know I wouldn't have no luck at all. Yeah, I'm a bad luck boy. Been having bad luck all of my days,
Impossible I have found, for when my chin is on the ground, I pick myself up, dust myself off, start all over again. Don't lose your confidence if you slip, be grateful for a pleasant trip, and pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again. Work like a soul inspired.
Thanks, Ella, by the way. We're going to talk a little bit about mythology with one of our favorite experts in this field, Maria Tatar, the professor of emerita of folklore and mythology at Harvard University, the author of books including The Heroine with 1001 Faces, which I have right next to me right here, and Arachnomania, Spiders and the Cultural Work They Do for Us. We might get into arachne and some spider stuff and everything. But Maria, before we talk about spiders, we have to talk about dogs because we've been talking about underdogs for half an hour now, but haven't really talked about where the term comes from. I assume it comes from dog fighting.
Oh, well, yes, it comes from a blood sport. And the underdog is the animal that is sort of forced into the bottom of the fray. And of course, there's the top dog and the underdog. And guess who you're going to be rooting for?
Yes, unless you have bet on the top dog. But I don't want to be too functionalist about all this, but I assume a lot of the stories we're probably going to talk about here, often had a purpose. I mean, stories tend to have purposes. And one of them might be as kind of a pep talk. I mean, in any encounter, there is somebody who presumably has a disadvantage, the little village being attacked by the Ostrogoths or whatever it was. I assume that there is a kind of morale-building quality to a lot of the stories that you've studied.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And you can think about the military pep talk, the story of David and Goliath. So we could start with the Bible, with these sacred stories where there's the Philistine giant, Goliath, who is facing the humble shepherd boy, and is defeated. So we can go from that end of the spectrum to the infantile, to childhood stories, where we're not just giving children pep talks, but we're teaching them values in a sense. So we have something like Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling, a case of the underdog who turns into a beautiful swan, and he's mocked and bullied in the barnyard. And then by the end, he's soaring off as a beautiful swan, becoming part of the universe of, what did you call it, charismatic megafauna? Not quite there, but almost. Or The Tortoise and the Hare, a lesson in grim determination. If you decide you're going to win the race, you will. And even if you're something of a plodder, you're going to beat that athletic hare who, he may have that prowess, but you have something else.
Yeah,
So
I think we're happy when the hare is defeated because he's kind of a jerk, or he's very self-satisfied. But I think
that's
it might also be another. I mean, these stories have, if they have functions, may have multiple functions, and that's also a warning to people about sitting on an advantage until it becomes a disadvantage. It's as instructive to the plotter, but also instructive to the front runner who might get a little bit careless.
Oh, absolutely. And that story is particularly interesting because I've read it or talked about it with many people. And some people actually do identify with the hare and see that as, just as you mentioned, it's a lesson in pride. Watch out, because if you're overconfident, you're not going to win that race.
Let's talk a little bit about mythology specifically. Typically, if you want to be an underdog, just pick a fight with a god. And we see that over and over again. Maybe we could start with, we'll do a few of them, but I know Psyche is somebody that you've looked at and gets into kind of a problem with Venus slash Aphrodite, right? Can you tell us that story?
Oh, yes. Well, we could do Psyche and Arachne.
Yeah.
And you're right. There's always a kind of beauty contest that takes place. And Venus is jealous of Psyche. And what does Psyche do but undertake a journey, carry out all of these tasks, and then triumph in the end, in a way? I think even more interesting is the story of Arachne, who is in a contest with Athena. And she is a woman. She's a weaver. She's a girl, actually, a young girl living in Lydia. And she is in a weaving contest with Athena. And what does she do? What does Psyche do but speak truth to power?
And well, isn't
Sorry,
yeah,
Arachne.
Well, isn't
No,
Arachne? She's
yeah.
almost kind of a whistleblower too, right? I mean, the weaving is maybe some stuff that the gods aren't super comfortable having the
what
public
does
know
she?
about.
She weaves the sexual assaults of the gods into the tapestry. And of course, Athena is outraged by all of this and tears the beautiful tapestry in two. And, think that that tapestry is not only beautiful, but it's also a vehicle of justice in a way. It's, again, speaking truth to power. So, and then poor Arachne is punished by Athena and turned into a spider. And of course, she does live on and continue weaving, but she can only do that in dark, dusty corners.
I think it's also interesting to see how those stories spill into European fairy tales. I think I'm correct that Psyche, among some of the degrading tasks she has to do, is separating a bunch of different kinds of grains that are all mixed together. We see that sometimes, I think, in Cinderella. That's one of the things she has to pick lentils out of ashes or something. There's this kind of, there's sort of two things that I see. One of them is, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And also that idea that the tasks you do as an underdog are meant to further humiliate you and lower your status.
Lower your status, exactly, because there's Cinderella at the hearth, not only having to carry out these tasks, but then becoming dirty and soiled and all of that. So it's so interesting how the tropes of myths migrate into fairy tales, into the domestic scene. That is, these stories that were once sacred sort of move into a different sphere. And then today, of course, what about myth and fairy tales? Those are the stories we tell to children. But I think you can think of the tropes and the structures of the tales in interesting ways and contrast them.
Well, I think also, I mean, we should talk about Christianity for just a second here, which is a very syncretistic, as they say, theology. It borrows and amalgamates all kinds of things that came before. I mean, Jesus is kind of an underdog story. God decides to re-enter the world in the very vulnerable person.
Persecuted? Yeah.
Say a little bit more about that. But it seems to me that sets up as an underdog story.
Oh, yes. I mean, what you're doing is so wonderful because you're dipping into the great cauldron of story. And I always think that these distinctions between fairy tales, myths, and fables, fiction, movies, they're really false distinctions, that we have this gigantic cauldron of story that is always bubbling. And of course, this biblical, we think of the story of Jesus as biblical and unique, and yet it's connected with so many of our cultural stories.
Yeah, I read a passage by Henry Nouwen, the Dutch Catholic theologian. He says, compassion requires us to be weak with the weak, vulnerable with the vulnerable, powerless with the powerless. Compassion means full immersion in the condition of being human. And I think that's a little bit there in this idea of a baby born to rather powerless human parents in a pretty autocratic environment. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, what you were talking about before that is we all feel at some point and at many points in our lives as meek and small, like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And we're looking for a miracle in a sense. And this is what connects with Jesus, of course, the idea of a miracle and of a transformation, of a massive change that is going to make the world a better place with compassion, with empathy. That, I think, is a utopian hope that is with us today as well.
Yeah, and I think also one of the reasons we have this passion for underdogs is this notion, and it's almost innate in us, I think, of justice, that the idea that the first should be last and the last should be first at certain points. There should be some balancing of the scales of existence. And hence, when somebody's down, we kind of root for them to go up. I don't know. Does that ring true for you?
Oh, yeah. This idea of equal distribution, beauty and fairness and justice. I think righting the scales. I think that is kind of in our DNA. And, look at children on a playground. What is the chant that we hear more often than anything else? That's not fair. So even small children on the playground want a form of justice. It may be a naive form of justice, but it's there, it's in them. And I have the feeling, they're trained to feel that way, but I think they're also born with that instinct. We want things to be fair, we want goods to be distributed in equal fashion.
I think just to bring up one last thing, too, we certainly live in an environment right now where credentials are extremely important. And I know in the pre-interviews you mentioned Aaron Brockovich. I think that's sort of a great example of somebody who sort of is, well, I don't exactly have the credentials that it takes, but I do have energy and a sense of justice. Say a little bit about how you see that in the underdog narrative.
Well, I think of that story. That is, there's Erin Brockovich, a single mother, penniless. And she basically bangs on the door of a lawyer and more or less demands to be hired for a position. Isn't it a file clerk or something like that? And then what does she take on? I mean, this is the David fighting Goliath, a gigantic corporation. And then also she's driven by curiosity, by passion, by a need to secure justice for others. So it's an extraordinary story of the underdog. And I would say here that many of the underdogs, the female underdogs that we find in literature and myth and fairy tale, are seekers of they're on a mission.
Right. And I think we should get in the habit, Maria, now of saying about Erin Brockovich, not that she's David taking on Goliath, but that she's Arachne taking on the gods. Let's get the gender right here, too, while we're at it. Maria Tatar, so great to talk to you. Always wonderful. You honor us with your presence. Professor Emerita of Folklore and Mythology at Harvard University. She's the author of books including The Heroine with 1001 Faces and now Arachnomania, Spiders, and the cultural work they do for us. I feel that's a future episode that we hope to do with you. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about boxing.
He said, "Come here, Junior. I'm gonna give you a spanking."
David took his slingshot and he swung it round his head. Oh, blew that ball and the giant dropped.
Boom, he dropped dead. Yeah, no, little David made a
And we are back. Time to say some thank yous first to our technical producer, the maestro, Dylan Reyes. Lily Tyson Quality Entertainment Productions is the force behind this episode. We're very happy about that. And Robin Doyen-Aiken is our boss, and she's great, and she watches over us and makes sure that bad things don't happen to us. I can't even believe that I haven't talked to this gentleman before, because he's certainly been on my radar for a long time. We want to talk a little bit about boxing, but before we even bring Iceman John Scully aboard, let's play the music. Here we go, C1. So, Iceman John Scully, former world-ranked light heavyweight contender and currently a boxing trainer. It's the 50th anniversary of Rocky. Should I address you as John or as Iceman? I'd like to address you as Iceman, if that's okay.
That's fine with me.
Okay. So I just assume in the heart of every boxer that Rocky music is playing a little bit. That idea must be a very powerful one as you move up through the ranks.
Yeah, for sure. Every boxer, especially in my era, has done their road work to the Rocky theme song. 100%.
And it is absolutely the story of an underdog, at least for a while he's an underdog, who moves up through just grit and determination. And I'm assuming that also provides a certain level of encouragement and maybe comfort as a boxer moves through the inevitable rough patches of being a boxer.
Right. Well, you go like in the movie, he's facing Apollo Creed, and that would be like a kid from Hartford that you've never heard of, that has 30 fights and he's won 20 of them and he lost 10. And all of a sudden they say one day, look, we're going to give you a shot at Floyd Mayweather Jr. You're going to fight Floyd Mayweather. That would be what it would be like. It would be almost impossible for him to even win a round against Floyd Mayweather. And that's what he'd be going up against.
Let's talk about what I think a lot of people think is the biggest boxing upset in history. I don't know whether you do or not, but this would be 1990. This would be Mike Tyson versus Buster Douglas. I believe that fight, the odds went off at 42-1. And here's because Mike Tyson was at that point 37-0 with I think 33 knockouts of those 37 wins, which is insane. Here's how that fight ended. C2, please.
But the big surprise to me is the way Buster came back in the 9th round. Buster not intimidated. He wants to keep it going. Mike actually, his legs, notice his legs and his wide legs together as Buster's landing these. Oh, nice uppercut by Buster Douglas. Look at this. For the first time in his career, Mike Tyson hits the canvas. He may not be able to recover. It's up to 7 and 8. He doesn't get him out. Unbelievable.
So, Iceman, from Tyson's point of view, there was probably kind of a tune-up fight. He wanted to get to Holyfield. I don't think he took Douglas all that seriously. Douglas's mother had died 23 days before the fight. He had the flu. You don't get any more underdog than this, Iceman. But tell me a little bit about how you see that.
I remember I didn't even watch the fight. I went to, I think it was... Red Lobster. My friend and I, we went to Red Lobster that night. I didn't even watch the fight. And when I came home, they were interviewing Buster Douglas in the ring, and it was obvious he won. And it's just one of those things. I mean, it was at that time it was like a miracle that he won the fight. It was almost unfathomable that he could win that fight.
But I think also when you're training fighters, it's a great object lesson too. There is no fighter that you shouldn't take seriously. I mean, I think we know from the backstory now that Tyson was maybe even out partying the night before and feeling as though this wasn't he didn't need a full night's sleep to beat a guy like Buster Douglas. But I assume that's a lesson this fight teaches people.
Right. Well, I remember Roy Jones always saying, he said, when I train to fight, I train like I'm trying to fight me, like, who I am, pound for pound, the best fighter in the world. I'm fighting me. So whatever I have to do to get ready for me is what I need to do to get ready. So, when you're not doing the right things and it's, you could see it'd be surprising for some people, but at that level, it's just like Tyson was so dominant and fearsome and deadly that you could understand how he could just begin to believe it. He was only I think 23 years old.
Yeah.
And he's fighting a guy who had been stopped before.
Right.
So
Douglas had not fought well.
Like
we should say in true underdog fashion, Buster Douglas got $1.3 million for winning that fight. Tyson got $6 million for losing it. But let's talk a little bit closer to home than Japan, where I think that fight was. Let's talk about Marlon Starling and maybe Mark Breland. Tell people that story if they don't know it.
Well, Marlon at that point, he had lost just a few months earlier to Johnny Bumpfist. He didn't look particularly good. And Breland at the time, it's a funny thing. At that time, Breland was my favorite fighter. Even though Marlon was the hometown guy, I was a Mark Breland fan. And I didn't think in a million years Marlon was going to win that fight. I don't think anybody did. Mark was destined to be the next Sugar Ray Robinson, the next Sugar Ray Leonard. And, but I always remember Marlon telling me that he trained harder for that fight than he ever trained, for any fight ever. And that the one thing he made up his mind, he knew he was going to have to take abuse because, Marlon was a defensive fighter. He didn't take abuse. But he realized, to win this fight, I'm going to have to take abuse. I can't be defensive. I have to go beyond myself. And he did it. He did it. And I remember exactly where I was watching the fight. I remember jumping up and down, and I ran upstairs to tell whoever was upstairs. I ran upstairs to tell him what happened. Just a phenomenal thing. And as I was telling, the woman with your show yesterday, I was saying how that fight actually inspired me to my greatest victory as a boxer. And the fact that Marlon overcame those type of odds.
And I assume that's the Darren Allen fight.
Darren Allen, exactly. Yeah. Darren Allen was a world champion and a guy who I knew all about. I was like a fan. I was in awe of this guy. I mean, he was phenomenal. But as I got closer to the fight, your mind, it takes over. And, I began to see myself more as something big, and I realized it was going to be a tough fight either way. But Marlon overcoming Breland gave me the idea, gave me the hope, because at the time, Darren was a world champion. He had represented the United States in all kinds of international matches against Cuba and Russia, and he had beaten so many, gold medalists from the Olympics, and he was just that guy. And I always wanted to fight him. And I kind of like Marlon, I went above myself. I fought better than I ever fought. And, I kind of think deep down, I think Marlon beating Breland helped me a great deal to achieve that.
I got only about 60 seconds left, but can you describe how that feels? Look, it feels great to win any fight. You always feel pretty good. But I have to assume you get flooded with something else.
I'm going to tell you something I told your girl there the other day. And I want people to understand this. I have a daughter, right? Yeah. And I've told my daughter this because she's read it different places, and I had to explain it to her. I said, listen, I've been quoted as saying, beating Darren Allen was the happiest moment of my life by far.
Yeah.
And people say, well, what about when your daughter was born? I say, yeah, but see, I'm a different kind of guy. Like, I knew she was on the way. I knew she was coming. This was not a surprise. So I took it in stride. Oh, here she is. This is great. But when I beat Darren, I didn't know I had achieved that till they actually said it over the loudspeaker. It was a surprise. It was something different. But I always point to that moment because, like I said, the underdog situation of beating that particular guy. I could have won that tournament, that same tournament. I could have beat another guy, and it would have been big, but it wouldn't have been the same. Right. I had to beat Darren Allen.
Iceman, we got to stop there, but I'm sure we'll talk again. This has been a lot of fun. Iceman John Scully, former world-ranked light heavyweight contender, now a boxing trainer. Thanks to all of you who listened, and thanks to Lily Tyson Quality Entertainment Productions for making this possible.